Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. I never believed a marriage ended in one moment. Looking back, ours ended long before Judith asked for the divorce. I just didn't know it yet. That Friday, I finished work earlier than expected. I was a maintenance supervisor for a chain of commercial buildings outside Asheville, North Carolina. Most people thought I spent my days fixing broken pipes and replacing light fixtures. That was fine with me. I liked working with my hands more than sitting behind a desk pretending to be important. I stopped at a bakery on the way home. Judith had mentioned earlier that week she missed their cinnamon bread. Funny how life works. I walked through the front door carrying the warm loaf when I heard her laughing upstairs. I wasn't trying to listen. Then I heard my name. "I'm done pretending," Judith said. "I can't spend the rest of my life counting every dollar." Her older sister Karen answered through the speakerphone. "Then stop pretending. Grant can give you the life Charlie never could." Judith laughed. "You should see Grant's place. Rooftop pool, imported furniture. He talks about investments instead of broken air conditioners." Karen laughed too. "And Charlie?" Judith didn't even hesitate. "Charlie is a good man, just too small. He's comfortable being average. I don't want average anymore." My hand tightened around the paper bag. Then came the sentence that stayed with me. "I'd rather be divorced than poor." Silence. Not from them. From me. I quietly set the bread on the kitchen counter. Judith never noticed I had come home. She kept talking as if I wasn't even there. I walked back outside, got into my truck, and drove away. No dramatic entrance, no yelling, no accusations. A man doesn't always need to make noise to make a decision. I drove to the small workshop I rented on weekends. It was where I restored old furniture when I wanted some peace. My phone buzzed. Judith had sent a message asking if I could pick up milk on the way home. I looked at it for a second. Then I put the phone back in my pocket. By the time I locked the workshop that evening, my mind was already made up. If she wanted out, I'd hold the door open. The next morning, I was making coffee when Judith walked into the kitchen. She looked surprised to see me. "I thought you'd already left." I changed my schedule. She poured herself coffee but kept watching me. "Charlie," I nodded. "You want a divorce?" The cup almost slipped from her hand. "Who told you?" "I heard enough." She stared for several seconds before letting out a slow breath. "Then you know why." "I do." She straightened her shoulders. "I don't think we're right for each other anymore." "I agree." Her eyes narrowed. "That's it? What else is there to say?" "I expected—" She stopped herself. "You expected me to argue." She looked away. "I expected you to care." I smiled once. "I do care. That's why I'm not going to waste either of our time." She blinked. "I've already spoken with an attorney." "Good. I want this to stay civil." "It will. I'll probably keep the house." "You can have it." "The SUV? Take it." "The savings? They're yours." Now she looked confused. "Charlie, why are you making this so easy?" "Because once I decide something, I don't go backward." For the first time since we'd met, Judith looked uncertain, almost nervous. I finished my coffee and grabbed my truck keys. As I reached the door, she spoke again. "You're really just walking away." I looked back at her. "No." I opened the door. "I'm walking forward." Then I left without another word. I moved out the next day. Not to a friend's couch, not to my parents'. I rented a small apartment above an old machine shop on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything I needed and was 5 minutes from work. Judith never asked where I was staying. She was too busy posting pictures. A week after I left, I saw one of them by accident. Grant Collins stood beside her in a tailored suit, one arm around her waist. They were smiling in front of a luxury hotel downtown. The caption talked about finally living without limits. I looked at it once. Then I deleted the app. There was no reason to watch someone make a mistake they were determined to make. Over the next few weeks, the paperwork moved faster than I expected. Then my divorce attorney called. "Everything's ready, Charlie." She signed every document. "Good. You're giving up more than most people would." "I know." He paused. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure." A week later, we stood before a family court judge. The hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. The judge approved the settlement. The divorce was finalized. Judith walked out without looking back. I did the same. But instead of driving home, I headed across town to a quiet brick office that hadn't changed in 30 years. The gold plaque beside the door read, "Samuel Whitmore, Attorney at Law." Samuel had known my father almost his entire life. He stood as soon as I walked in. "You look just like him." "I've heard that before." He smiled and motioned toward the chair. "I've been waiting for this day." "So have I." He opened a thick leather folder. "Your father was a careful man." "That's one way to describe him." "He loved you enough to make sure nobody could ever love your money first." I nodded. That sounded exactly like my father. Samuel slid several documents across the desk. 20 years ago, he placed the family company, investment accounts, and commercial properties into a protected estate. I didn't interrupt. There was one condition. I had to build my own life first, Samuel smiled, and remain financially independent from anyone you married. Which means, now that your divorce is final, every restriction has expired. He handed me a single envelope. Inside was one key card. Across the front was the logo of Briar Ridge Manufacturing, the largest industrial equipment company in 3 counties. I looked up. "I own all of it?" "You own 82%. I leaned back but didn't smile. Samuel noticed. "You don't seem surprised." "My father taught me something." "And what's that?" "A man shouldn't celebrate having more money." He picked up the folder. "What should he celebrate?" I stood and slipped the key card into my wallet, having the freedom to use it the right way. Samuel nodded slowly. "I think your father knew you'd say exactly that." As I walked outside, my phone vibrated. It was Judith. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. Her voice sounded strangely soft. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine." "You really don't seem upset." "I've got work to do." There was a long silence. Finally, she asked, "That's all you have to say?" "It is." I ended the call before she could answer. Some people think strength means winning an argument. Sometimes strength is simply refusing to have one. The next morning, I drove through the front gates of Briar Ridge Manufacturing for the first time as its new owner. Not a single person there knew they were about to meet the man Judith had called poor. The first thing I did at Briar Ridge wasn't sit in my father's office. I walked the factory floor. Men and women were already at work. Welders, machinists, forklift operators, people with grease on their hands and pride in their work. I knew that feeling. A gray-haired foreman walked over and stopped in front of me. "You must be Charlie." "I am." He held out his hand. "I'm Leonard Brooks. Your father hired me 31 years ago." I shook his hand. "It's good to meet you." He looked me up and down before smiling. "Your father always said you'd show up wearing work boots instead of expensive shoes." I guess he knew me pretty well. He did. Instead of giving speeches, I spent the next 2 weeks learning every department. I asked questions. I listened more than I talked. When something needed fixing, we fixed it. When someone had a better idea than mine, we used theirs. Word spread quickly. People realized I wasn't interested in proving I was the smartest man in the room. I wanted the company to get better. That mattered. Meanwhile, Judith seemed to be living the dream she always wanted. Every few days, another photo appeared online. Fancy restaurants, weekend trips, designer handbags. Grant always stood beside her wearing another expensive watch. People left comments saying they looked perfect together. I knew better. Real wealth doesn't need to advertise itself. One afternoon, I was leaving a meeting with our engineering team when I stopped at a traffic light downtown. A white luxury SUV pulled up beside me. Judith. She looked over. At first, she didn't recognize me. Then her eyes widened. I wasn't driving my old pickup anymore. I was driving a black Range Rover the company kept for executive travel. She stared through her windshield. I gave her a small nod. Nothing more. The light turned green. I drove away. That evening my phone buzzed. Judith had sent a short message asking if we could meet for coffee. She said she had a few things she wanted to ask. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing to discuss. The next morning my assistant knocked on my office door. "Charlie, Channel 7 wants an interview." "About what?" "They're covering the ownership change." "I'll pass." She smiled. "I figured you'd say that." Before lunch, another call came. Then another. Apparently, someone had leaked the story. By the end of the week, the local business journal published a full article with my picture on the front page. The headline read, "Charlie Bennett takes over Briar Ridge Manufacturing. New owner promises to invest in local jobs." I barely thought about it. I had payroll to approve, equipment upgrades to review, real work. That afternoon, my phone rang. Judith. This time, I answered. Her voice was shaking. "Charlie, I just saw something online." "I'm sure you did. They're saying you own Briar Ridge." "I do." Silence. Then came the question I had been expecting. How is that even possible? I leaned back in my chair. You never asked much about my family. I thought your father owned a small repair shop. He owned that too. Another long silence. Finally, she whispered, "What else don't I know?" I looked out through my office window at hundreds of people walking across the factory yard. Then I gave her the only answer she deserved. You stopped trying to know me a long time before the divorce. I ended the call. Something told me that wasn't the end of it. It was only the beginning. Judith called me 5 times that night. I answered once. "Charlie, we need to talk." "We don't need to do anything." "Please," she said. "Just let me understand." I looked at the stack of reports on my desk. You understood exactly what you wanted when you left. You wanted money, status, and someone who looked successful. You got it. That's not fair. It's accurate. She was quiet for a moment. "Can we meet?" I thought about it. Not because I missed her. Because I wanted to say things once and never again. "One coffee," I said. "Tomorrow, Harbor Street Cafe, noon." She was already there when I arrived. Judith looked perfect. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect dress. The same woman who had looked at my old truck like it embarrassed her. She stood when she saw me. "Charlie." I sat down. "You have 30 minutes." She flinched at the tone but sat across from me. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Tell you what?" "That your family owned Briar Ridge. That you were going to inherit everything." I took a sip of coffee. "Because I wanted someone to marry me for who I was, not for what my family owned." "That's not fair," she said again. I leaned forward. "Then let's be fair. You called me average. You told your sister you'd rather be divorced than poor. You left me for a man with expensive suits and a rooftop pool. Which part am I getting wrong?" Her face turned red. "You heard that?" I heard enough. Tears formed in her eyes. I was frustrated. We were stuck. We weren't stuck. We had a paid-off house, no debt, and a life most people would be grateful for. But you never wanted more. I wanted peace. I wanted a family. I wanted a wife who respected me. She looked down at the table. "Grant and I aren't together anymore." That surprised me. "What happened?" She laughed bitterly. "He knew about your family." I frowned. "He did?" She nodded. "He thought I knew too. When the article came out, I confronted him. He admitted most of his properties were leveraged and that the image he sold wasn't exactly real. Meaning? Meaning he was rich on social media and in debt in real life." I sat back. That explained a lot. Judith reached across the table. "I made a mistake, Charlie. A terrible mistake." I moved my hand before she could touch it. "No," I said calmly. "You made a choice." She started crying. "I still love you." I looked at her for a long moment. There was a time those words would have changed everything. Not anymore. "I knew about Grant before you asked for the divorce." Her head snapped up. "What?" "I had proof about a week before you asked for the divorce. I didn't confront you because I don't compete for someone who has already decided to leave." "You knew and you didn't fight for us?" "I don't chase people who don't want to stay." Her tears came harder. "Charlie, we could start over." I stood. "No, Judith, we can't." She looked up at me, desperate. "Is this revenge?" I shook my head. "If it was revenge, I would have told you who I was before you left." I put money on the table. "This is consequences." Then I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. As I got into my truck, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Leonard Brooks. "The board approved your apprenticeship program. Press conferences next week." I smiled. While Judith was trying to return to the past, I was building the future, and the future didn't have room for second guesses. 3 days after we met at the cafe, I got a call from my attorney, Samuel Whitmore. He didn't waste time. "Judith has hired another lawyer." I leaned back in my chair. "For what?" "They're trying to reopen the divorce." I almost smiled. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming you hid assets." I expected that. "So did I," Samuel chuckled. "I've already sent them everything." "How did they react?" "They stopped talking." The following week, I met Samuel in his office. He placed a thick folder on the desk. "The estate plan your father created is almost impossible to challenge." I remember him saying he'd thought of everything. He had. Samuel opened the file. "Your father transferred ownership into a protected family trust years ago. You couldn't sell it. You couldn't control it. You couldn't even access it until after your divorce became final. So, legally, You didn't own those assets during your marriage. And after the divorce, they became yours. I nodded once, exactly as he planned. Samuel smiled. Your father wasn't protecting the money. He was protecting me. A few days later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Judith. I answered. You planned all of this? No. You knew I'd leave? No. Then why was everything protected? Because my father believed character should be tested before wealth was handed over. Her breathing grew heavier. So I failed. You answered your own question. She stayed quiet. Finally, she whispered, I hate myself. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything useful I could say. A month later, Briar Ridge hosted its annual community open house. Instead of showing off machines, we announced something new. Trade scholarships, paid apprenticeships, free technical training for young adults who couldn't afford college. The parking lot was full. Families, students, teachers, local reporters. I stood near the stage talking with employees when Leonard walked over. You've got a visitor. I followed his eyes. Judith. She stood near the entrance wearing a plain navy dress. No designer purse, no expensive sunglasses, just Judith. She looked nervous. I won't make a scene, she said quietly. You've got 5 minutes. She nodded. I came to apologize. You already did. I know. This one's different. I crossed my arms. Go ahead. She looked around at the families filling the courtyard. I finally understand something. I waited. You never wanted to impress strangers? No. You wanted to build something? Yes. And I spent years trying to turn you into someone else. I looked at her for a long moment. That's true. A tear rolled down her cheek. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't comfort her. Some lessons aren't supposed to be softened. You didn't destroy me, she frowned. You destroyed your place in my life. She closed her eyes. I know. Before either of us spoke again, Leonard called from the stage. Charlie, they're ready. I looked back at Judith. I have people waiting. She nodded slowly. I won't bother you again. I hope you mean that. I do. She turned and walked toward the parking lot without looking back. I watched for only a second. Then I walked onto the stage. Hundreds of people applauded. Not because I was wealthy, because they believed in what we were building together. And for the first time since my marriage ended, I realized I hadn't won because I had more money. I'd won because I never became the man Judith expected me to be. Life settled into a rhythm after that. The company kept growing. The apprenticeship program filled every available spot in less than a week. Local schools started recommending students. Parents stopped me in grocery stores just to shake my hand. That meant more to me than any headline ever could. One afternoon, Leonard stepped into my office. You've got another interview request. I looked up from a stack of blueprints. Who this time? The Business Channel. Tell them no. He laughed. You really don't enjoy attention, do you? I enjoy getting work done. Your father was the same way. After he left, I smiled to myself. Maybe I was becoming more like him than I realized. A few weeks later, I ran into someone I hadn't expected. Grant Collins. He was sitting alone in a quiet steakhouse while I was meeting suppliers for dinner. He recognized me immediately. Charlie. I walked over. Grant. He stood and extended his hand. I shook it. I owe you an apology, he said. For what? I knew Judith was married when we started seeing each other. I figured. I thought your marriage was already over. It was heading that way. He looked embarrassed. I wasn't honest with her either. So I've heard. He sighed. My investors pulled out. A couple of deals collapsed. Most of what Judith thought I owned belonged to the bank. I know. He looked surprised. You know? I know enough. Grant rubbed the back of his neck. She came to see me after your interview on television. And? She wasn't asking about me. I already knew the answer. She was asking about you. He nodded. I told her she made the biggest mistake of her life. I looked at him for a second. You finally told her the truth. I should have done it sooner. There wouldn't have been any point. He frowned. What do you mean? If she needed another man to explain my value, she never understood it in the first place. Grant slowly nodded. I guess you're right. We shook hands again. That was the last time I ever saw him. Winter arrived early that year. One snowy evening, Samuel Whitmore called. The court officially dismissed Judith's case. I expected that. She didn't even appeal. She finally accepted it. Looks that way. Before hanging up, Samuel paused. Your father would be proud of how you've handled all of this. I hope so. He always told me something. What was that? A man's greatest victory is walking away without becoming bitter. After we ended the call, I sat quietly in my office, not thinking about Judith, thinking about that sentence. He was right. Holding on to anger would have meant she was still controlling part of my life. She wasn't. Not anymore. The chapter had ended. I just didn't know I was about to receive one final reminder of it. A week before Christmas, a handwritten envelope arrived at my office. I recognized Judith's handwriting immediately. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. Instead, I opened it. The letter was short. She wrote that she wasn't asking for another chance. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She simply wanted me to know she'd sold the house. The same house she had fought so hard to keep. She said every room reminded her of the life she'd thrown away. She admitted something else. After the divorce, she'd spent months blaming me. Then she blamed Grant. Then she blamed her sister. Eventually, she ran out of people to blame. The last line caught my attention. For the first time in my life, I had to admit that the person who ruined my marriage was staring back at me in the mirror. I folded the letter and placed it inside my desk drawer. Not because I planned to read it again, because it belonged in the past, just like everything else. That evening, Briar Ridge hosted its annual holiday dinner. Employees brought their spouses and children. The room was loud. Kids were laughing. People who had worked together for decades were sharing stories. It felt like family. Leonard walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. You ever regret it? Regret what? The divorce. I thought about it for a moment. I regret who I thought she was. He nodded. But not losing her? I looked around the room, at people who respected one another, at young apprentices whose lives were changing because someone believed in them, at men and women who worked hard without pretending to be something they weren't. No, Leonard smiled. I figured that'd be your answer. Before the evening ended, I stepped onto the stage. The room became quiet. I won't keep you long, I said. When my father built this company, he believed success wasn't measured by what you owned. Everyone listened. He believed it was measured by the people whose lives became better because you showed up every day and did the right thing. I paused. I planned to keep doing exactly that. The applause lasted much longer than the speech. As I stepped off the stage, I realized something. Judith had divorced me because she believed I was poor. She thought money defined a man's future. She never understood that character builds everything money can't buy. She chased the appearance of success. I spent those same years building a life worth living. In the end, the biggest mistake Judith made wasn't walking away from my money. She never even knew it existed. The biggest mistake she made was walking away from the man who would have stood beside her through anything. By the time she understood that, I had already moved on, and I never looked back. Thank you for watching.